Hello everyone, Steve Sawyer here, Chief Clinical Consultant and co-founder of New Vision Wilderness Therapy, coming at you again for the first Friday of the month, and happy to have some of you with me here. So, been an exciting week out here. I'm up here in the Northwoods of Wisconsin. I've just spent the last few days immersed in the woods with our kiddos, did some brain spotting out there, and doing sessions, co-sessions with therapists, etc. And yeah, it's it's a beautiful time of year. You'll see all the color changes that we have going on up here with the yellows that come only from the tamarack trees. There's a deep, bright yellow that comes from them, and it's a great time of year up here. So I'm happy to be with you for another first Friday of the month for Miraculous Stories of Healing in the Woods. And, here to work through some things. I want to acknowledge that last month my story cut out. I'm going to complete that story by the end of this. So people were asking me to record it, and I just have been on the road and flying and presenting at conferences and stuff. And so I haven't really had the ability to sit down and really re-record it. So we're going to finish out with that story at the end of this. But I wanted to begin, as I do in all of these, the beginning of this session being focused on the understanding of brain spotting and various aspects of it. Please, I encourage you to really go back and watch the other videos I recorded along the ways. I'm getting lots of positive feedback on it, so grateful for that. And just enjoy the teaching aspects of this, both in training, but also just in spreading the news about brain spotting. This particular session, I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about what we see in brain spotting advancement. So there are many people that get trained in brain spotting, more and more by the day, which I'm really grateful for and excited about. And I train a lot of people. And as we see brain spotting develop, sometimes people will come back to me with this kind of perplexity around why they aren't seeing results, or somebody will call us and talk to me about a client that's not getting results with brain spotting, even though they're doing brain spotting. And one of our biggest philosophies in brain spotting is that we can really only heal our clients to the level at which we've healed ourselves. So that's one variable in this whole entire equation. But I want to talk more about technique in this particular recording more than anything else. I've watched many brain spotters over the years develop. And so I've been working with and training and working within brain spotting now for a total of 10 years. And how do we see these profound differences in results, and why is that? Brain spotting is a very precise neurological equation, and works in a profound way, with a neurological alignment to our stress response and threat response system in a way that really I haven't seen other therapies have in terms of response. We hear that from our clients. We hear that in trainings regularly. And that neurological equation is very precise. Part of becoming an excellent brain spotter is learning how to use that equation to its fullest capability. And so I'd like to talk about this from time to time. The difference between a brain spotting therapist who's just begun is it's more like experimentation. And when you get good with brain spotting, it's more of a facilitation and journey with the client. And when you have, 1,000 or more sessions in, your ability to kind of understand where the session is going and et cetera, can always be up for revision. This is one of our training beliefs inside of brain spotting, which is, assumptions get in our way. And so, our experience with brain spotting can inform how we progress in what we do, but we can't allow it to get in the way of judging and not practicing our no assumptions model. So for those of you that aren't familiar with brain spotting, one of the biggest things and one of the biggest freedoms of being a brain spotting therapist is that as a clinician, we don't have to be exactly sure where we're at and what we're doing in terms of the next step, etc. That a lot of times inside of brain spotting, the client is releasing things in a nonverbal way, and it's hard for us to interpret it. But the more experience we get in brain spotting, the more the trainings we go through, the more the advancement we have, and even the certification process builds to a level of confidence of how the system works. And then inside of that, we have this flexibility. So one of the key principles we train in early brain spotting phase 1 is this concept of wait. Why am I talking? And this is a really, really tough hoop for clinicians who first begin doing brain spotting training, because most of us have been trained to interact verbally with our clients to do our psychotherapy. Most of our training is in that direction. Most of the models are built about that verbal exchange of what's going on with a client, or talking through it with them and making sense of it from our frontal lobe's perspective. But in brain spotting, we're really trying to get to the nonverbal centers of the brain. And so to do that and to train people in the beginning of that work, in phase 1 training, we have to really train people, why am I talking? Because they need to hold back to allow the client to drop into that deep nonverbal world. Now, another really key aspect of brain spotting's philosophy and science is this concept of activation, that we need to have online the physiological stress response that's associated with whatever it is that we're working on, and it needs to have movement. One of the biggest ongoing struggle points that I see for beginning brain spotters is we train heavily on wait, and we utilize that, and we learn to utilize that, but when do we not wait? And so this key concept that really challenges beginning brain spotters, you develop and understand through client practice when this wait is not effective. When a client sits there that's had maybe 5 other therapists from us, sometimes in our case, 10, if there's nothing literally happening for them in that experience, yes, we can brain spot what they're feeling in that moment, the frustration, the inability to change, the inability to move, etc. But there's also a time and place for us to interact and figure out what's going on in that moment. And so, inside of our brain spotting training, beginning brain spotters are definitely different than ones that have been through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trainings, and phase 4 now, because you start to see the adaptation of some of these really kind of precise things we teach early on in brain spotting, like wait. So if a client is sitting in a stuck place that they've been stuck in their whole life and they're just staying and stuck, I oftentimes see people post this stuff on our Facebook practitioners page for brain spotting, etc., is wait again. But what happens for a client that has been waiting their whole entire life for something to move, and we just continue to wait, and we just sit with them in that wait? Now, oftentimes what we find scientifically, if we were to measure it in HRV, we would see that the activation is slowly dying away. Their sense of connection to it is dropping away. And so the sense of anything moving isn't there. The frustration is there. That's something place that they've been really familiar with. But here we are waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. This is often time where the practice and experience of a brain spotter having extensive knowledge and many sessions in, and the experience that is the coaching from our clients comes into play. Because when we wait and we ask somebody what's coming up for you now, and they say nothing, and they say that a handful of times, that starts to, we can learn to ask questions that investigate, is that activation online or is it not online? If it's not online, our point in doing brain spotting, as when I had meetings with David and Stephen Porges together, is to move implicit stored data to awareness data, explicit data to allow it to move. And if we're just waiting every single session on something somebody's stuck on, it's really important to understand that we're not moving implicit data to explicit data. And so there is a time and place not to wait. And this will confuse some of the people that were newly trained in brain spotting, or even people that only have a handful of sessions in, because there is a time and place to wait, and there's a time and place not to wait. So oftentimes people ask, well, when do you actually talk? Well, the neuroscience of how a session proceeds is how we can work with that. When people are in high activation, really expressive in terms of activation is moving, their external world is not at their high awareness. So them talking in that time frame doesn't make any sense at all, because they're focused on their internal world and they're deep within it, which is where we want them to work. We want to be out of their way, and that's definitely where we're waiting. But when we see the cycle of the activation come down and we get into the slower process where maybe their attunement to the outside world, you can sense it stronger. Maybe they look out the point and look at something that's in the room, or they notice your movement and you notice them noticing your movement. That is definitely a time to check in and notice, what are you noticing now? And if they continue to go into those activation cycles and nothing's moving and everything's stuck, we really are re-perpetuating this feeling of stuckness that they've been in for a really long time. And so we have to really take some time and figure out what that stuckness is about. This is something I train in the developmental trauma and specialized workshops, which is we have to examine and investigate at some level, what is the defended structure that we're working with and what is it that we're actually dealing with? So yes, we train you to wait. For you getting brain spotters, that's really important to learn that space and be familiar with it and be okay with it and not be limbically activated by it is something that we train in brain spotting training. But when we get into the deeper work, at some point when stuff is not moving, there's a time to investigate. And there's an art to doing that. And it's only through experience with brain spotting, and there's other knowledge concepts of where we go next and what we do that make this effective. All the addiction workshops that Jeff and Roby are doing, the countertransference workshops, etc., that other trainers are doing are really important for learning that balance and learning some of the technique that we've developed over many years of brain spotting to be able to interact with that so we're not re-fulfilling the prophecy that everything stays stuck and everything stays the same. So the neurophysiology of that is that if we are not moving implicit stored information to explicit, we may be reinforcing that stuck message. So going back to my story from the last recording that I didn't get to finish for you, this young man was an example of this. So he was showing up in an appeasement mode over and over again in terms of his interactions with our staff. We were working with his awareness of that. In his sessions with his client, he wouldn't quite go to full vulnerability. We could sense his fear related to that. And we could have just sat in there and tried to brain spot and tried to brain spot this and try to brain spot that, and he would have continued to have the underlying fear of that interaction. So my main session last time that I recorded was about the fear of an authority figure in front of you as you're doing brain spotting work, how much that affects our clients drastically. Through our not waiting and just staying within that inside of the session, we focused in on the here and now and noticed what's happening for you right now. And he started to surface this fear that comes from authority figures in front of him, and we brain spotted that. So this client in particular was showing up in appeasement day in and day out. We had focused on teaching him about that. There is a time and place, by the way, for all you that are brain spotters to be teaching clients about defensive structure, for them to understand how it's manifesting in their life, because sometimes that helps them cue in on what is the actual activation below that response. Not just brain spotting what they want to do today when they come in. A lot of our students and a lot of people that we see come in front of us, if we just said, what do you want to brain spot today every single time, they would brain spot everything in the universe except their true pain. So this young man was an example of it, that he would appease past that, and it was literally fear of an authority figure. So we're out in the woods, and this client had challenging brain spotting sessions, really hadn't got to the depth of the work that we were looking to accomplish with him, and that he needed to be able to really experience true full freedom from that implicit data that he'd been stuck in for a lot of his life in relationships to adults around him. And so at the end of that process, we get into brain spotting. We come into this brain spotting session with this understanding of fear and specifically how it manifests as appeasement. So we had to work through that inside of the session. So me and this young man and the therapist all sitting together worked into this sense of anxiety of us being right in front of him, sitting in front of him. Brain spotting that transitions into fear of us sitting in front of him. Transitioning that and going nonverbal deep into his brain, his implicit data of being terrorized, and his family particularly being terrorized by law enforcement due to what was going on in his family. Now, I'm not going to pass judgment of what they were doing was healthy or not healthy or anything of that nature, but their experience over and over again with an authority figure with a lot of power in their hands, even as much power as a brain spotting pointer, terrified this client. And so we had to go into the fear and the terror related to his fear of the authorities that are in front of him. And this led to deep work focusing in on his fear, actually of us as brain spotters first. Fear of authorities came online, and then implicit memory of a specific arrest of parents came online. That particular fear and experience and response with an authority figure with the amount of power that the police had a memory that was associated with very young, 3 or 4 years old, where there was a big arrest and situation with law enforcement. What was blocking his brain spotting would have never surfaced if we had just said, what do you want to work on today? Or if we had just done the standard, straight out the gate brain spotting approach. We had to work to figure out and work with his fear of actually doing the brain spotting to get access to the block of how the brain spotting was progressing. So we went into a very deep young memory, 3-4 years old, of this interactions with law enforcement that created extensive fear for him and had stayed with him his entire life. From 3 to 4, all the way until he sits in front of us, he was afraid of any adult figure that sat in front of him that had any sense of power or dominance in his life. And his response to that was appeasement. I will tell you what you want to hear. I will even play brain spotting for you. And as that is unfolding, and this is happening, we're literally reinforcing over and over again, because we hadn't dialed in on the activation of appeasement and the fear response that was truly underneath it. He would have continued to report brain spotting as fantastic, yet underneath it was a whole defensive structure. We hadn't got to the root trauma, early developmental trauma of these experiences with authority figures. So that goes back to the story of last session and this one, which is make sure that we investigate what we're brain spotting on carefully, that there is a time and place to teach our clients about defensive structure. There's a time and place not to brain spot exactly what our client wants to work on, but to get to the roots of what's underneath it. That's where going for the roots comes from in terms of my developmental trauma brain spotting training. And then to work diligently to investigate, even inside of the session, if somebody stays stuck, that stuckness has material to it. It has defended structure or fear or some other traumatic implicit memory driving it. That is where we got to get to with the brain spotting for it to have lasting healing. This is oftentimes how brain spotting for people that get frustrated isn't working for them. The clinician is missing and not investigating carefully what it is that's blocking them from dropping all the way into the brain spotting process. Sometimes it's us. Sometimes it's the pointer. Sometimes it's our authority. And sometimes it's just the experience of being stuck. The nervous system has been there a long time, and we have to work with that. So instead of just leaving clients sitting for extended periods of time, 30 minutes, never saying a word, if somebody is reporting stuck in our check-ins, we need to increase our presence to be able to use that dual ultimate frame to figure out what's really going on inside of that session. What's happening at that moment? What implicit memory might be lurking underneath there? But we might have to investigate what that activation is that's separate from the activation that we started on in terms of the distress, what they wanted to work on, etc. What's underneath that? And that is sometimes and requires some investigative process, including talking. So hopefully that's helpful for you today. I wanted to go back and finish that story to leave so many of you hanging for so long on that story. I've literally been on the road every week this last month here since I did last month's. And that young man in the long run had an incredible release of fear of authority and adults. And it was literally generalized from fear police to fear of authority to fear of all adults because they have power over me. When we brain spotted that and we healed that and we got into those early implicit memories, and by the way, there was a few other ones associated with the one I shared, by healing that, now he shows up authentically in relationship with all of us around him. And he doesn't have to appease anymore. And that is an essential aspect in brain spotting, knowing when to find that defensive structure that's blocking your work and how to work with that. That requires experience. You have to experiment your way there, get some teachings from others around that have a lot of experience with brain spotting to be able to step into that effectively. So hopefully that's helpful for some of you brain spotters on here. For some of you that are just listening to this work, you certainly would understand or have interacted with appeasement, sourcing, defensive structures, and all these things, and always understand that defenses are fear expressed. So if we can figure out what the fear really is underneath that defense, instead of just calling it a defense and challenging it, if we can figure out what the fear really is, that's where the real healing lies. So, as I always do, I'm going to end a moment with a brief scan. I'm here at our New Vision Wilderness Lodge. We just finished a family intensive this week, which was fantastic, and I got to be a big part of it and intervening, so I catch one glimpse of the lodge in there. This is our lake called Lone Wolf Lake out here at our base operation location in northern Wisconsin. So I'm going to just take a moment, be quiet, and give you a scan of the environment that surrounds us here. Have a good one. All right, there you have it. There's Lone Wolf Lake and New Vision Lodge here in northern Wisconsin. Good having another few minutes with you this month, and until next month, have good sessions and feel free to ask questions.